any good acting has behavior with it.
Nate, why? Why such bitterness? What have I done to you? Get out! You're no nephew of mine. As far as I'm concerned, you're as dead as that wretch Cermak.
You have to embellish the words with a certain amount of gravity. Because we're talking about things that are really important here, that are kind of secret. There's a natural kind of darkness when you talk about noir. You know, it's great. I love it.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right. What? Can I speak it? Moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Robcasting from right here in the Robservatory, Robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode 1096. I have to say, this is the longest period of time since I've started this channel that I've gone without doing a Robservations. It's been over a month. A lot of craziness. CinemaCon happened. I went to Seattle. All manner of other personal things were going on. Just wackiness, and I've missed you guys. I've missed doing the show, and it's, you know, there's so much going on in the world. Honestly, I didn't even know what to talk about, but there's so much to discuss, and I wanted to start out by talking about something I am enormously excited by and a little shocked by. And now, before I talk about this movie, I have to explain that in the early days of home video, when I first acquired a VCR in 1980, I used to go into what was generally considered to be the second video store in the United States. There was no Blockbuster. All video stores were mom and pop. There was a store called Video Station that was started by a man named Andre Blais, who started 20th Century Fox Home Video and later went on to produce movies for John Carpenter, like Prince of Darkness. Kind of a hero of mine. He's passed away. But during the early days of home video, because I was 13 years old and would go to this video store in Seattle, Video Space, that was owned by Weston Nishimura, I've talked about this a lot, who founded the VSDA, the Video Software Dealers Association of America. These guys that worked in the store gave me a job. Because I was just, I literally, imagine a 13-year-old kid that would walk into your store and just every single day look at all the movies over and over and over and over again. So they figured since I was there anyway, they'd make me useful. And I probably was breaking all kinds of laws working as a 13-year-old, but it was amazing. Back then, Universal MCA had released their movies on Laserdisc, but not on VHS. I was at the store the first time that we got a box of MCA home video releases. I mean, it was like Smokey and the Bandit and Animal House, and it was an amazing time. And Warner Brothers was one of the first studios. Fox, Andre Blais had licensed movies from Fox and started Magnetic Video, which they later had to buy back from him, and that's how I became president of 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. But Warner Brothers was also an early adopter of the movie rental scene. And early in those heady days, you could get Ken Russell's movie, The Devils. And if you were a horror fan or a fan of alternative cinema, let's call it, everybody knew The Devils. The Devils was it was an infamous film, and of course, Ken Russell was sort of an enfant terrible. He had made movies like The Music Lovers, and he made Tommy, and he later went on, maybe people will remember, Altered States, and then he went on to do things like Gothic. But he was one of the great British directors, and he was an incredible visual stylist, and he certainly liked to flaunt convention. And The Devils was a movie that was based on an Aldous Huxley novel, The Devils of London. And it was basically, well, I'm going to read an article about it. But what's important is the film was considered blasphemous. It was a religious, erotic horror movie. And a lot of people were pissed off by it. And it had sections of it removed because it had received an X rating. Most notably, a sequence called the Rape of Christ sequence that was removed. The great British critic Mark Kermode made a documentary about The Devils, knows all about it. Well, over the last 25 years, aside from a smattering of screenings here and there and being able to get various censored versions of it, very difficult to see. And I've been talking to George Feltenstein at Warner Brothers, Warner Archive, for years about The Devils. And the only way the film could get even released, it had to go up to the highest levels of Warner Brothers. I mean, it was basically kept under lock and key, and nobody wanted to release it. I think that there were certain people, and I can probably name names, but I won't, who had been at Warner Brothers that were vehemently against releasing this movie because of their own religious beliefs. But at CinemaCon this year, Warner Brothers announced a new division, Warner Brothers Clockwork. And because I'm a Stanley Kubrick fan, the logo that they came up with, which they unveiled at CinemaCon, is very redolent of course, the logo for Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film, A Clockwork Orange. And I was delighted by that because Stanley Kubrick's my favorite director. But anyway, what their mandate is, they've announced their first new theatrical movie, and that's going to be Sean Baker of Anora and Florida Project fame, his new film, Te Amo. But in a surprise announcement that floored me and floored many people in the film world, it's interesting now because a lot of people on film Twitter have no clue about these films. And it's, I've often said pop culture has a half-life of 20 years. Most of the film fans, I'm not saying all, but when you talk about movies of the 70s, especially a lot of the British films of the 70s or alternative films of the 70s, not a lot of people today know them. But when I became a film fanatic, really 10, 11, 12, and when I was 13, I was able to get my hands on a VCR, it was going to see these films. I mean, we were voracious film watchers. I saw The Devils actually in a theater in Seattle. And these were all films that we all knew. Like, me and my friends knew these movies, and even at 13 and 14 and 15, we would get together and watch them on videotape. And it's a little it's disconcerting these days because it's very difficult to speak about so much of film history because nobody knows it. But anyway, I wanted to read an article for you guys. There's The Devils had a great poster. And here's some imagery from The Devils, and you can see just how visionary Ken Russell as a director. I mean, this film is incredibly visually striking. And in a way, there are certain scenes, this almost looks like some kind of a science fiction film. Obviously, it stars Oliver Reed, the great Oliver Reed, and Vanessa Redgrave. And it is definitely a film not for the faint of heart. And it is a movie that is a grail disc for most cineasts. Look at this. So incredible, absolutely incredible. Well, the film is coming out. I wanted to read just a quick article here. It was in Reactor magazine. It was written by Matthew Bird, and it was published today. Ken Russell's long banned The Devils director's cut releasing in theaters this October. You'll finally be able to see the proper version of this blasphemous masterpiece. Well, this is a surprise. After it was announced that a 4K restoration of Ken Russell's The Devils will be screened as part of the 2026 Cannes Classics lineup, Warner Brothers has revealed that they will also be releasing that restoration of the previously censored film in movie theaters the week of October 16th this year. They are also teaming up with Britain's BFI, the British Film Institute, to do this. We don't know when or how you'll be able to buy tickets for the screening quite yet, but Warner Brothers has described the event as a one-week engagement that will likely only play on select screens. At the very least, it's hard to imagine this one opening wide. Along with the aforementioned screening of this restored cut of the film at Cannes, rumors suggest that this version of the movie will also receive a physical media release sometime later this year. Details aside, this is really quite a big deal for horror fans and those who follow all forms of lost media. Ken Russell's The Devils has been listed among the most shocking and controversials ever made, ever since it received a somewhat surprising theatrical release in 1971. Based on Aldous Huxley's 1952 nonfiction story, The Devils of Loudun, it follows a French priest in the early 1600s who becomes the focus of both a social revolution and sexual awakening among the local nuns. Yeah, pretty risque material, especially when you consider that it was released in the early 1970s and by a major studio. However, Warner Brothers did not release Ken Russell's complete version of The Devils in theaters at that time. They removed a few key sequences from the British release of the movie to receive an X rating and made additional cuts to ensure the film received an R rating in the United States. The Holy Grail director's cut of the film, with the original scenes properly restored, didn't screen in theaters until 2002, when film critic Mark Kermode managed to reassemble a version of the movie as part of a documentary about the Devils called Hell on Earth. Since then, Kermode has stated that Warner Brothers has blocked most attempts to release that version of the movie in any format, and have reportedly even shut down Criterion's attempts to distribute the movie. Mind you, it's been fairly difficult to watch any version of The Devils via any official formats over the years. Even censored versions of the movie can only be found on unofficial or semi-unofficial physical media releases and the occasional streaming service appearance. Various versions of The Devils have been banned and censored worldwide since its release, and the director's cut of the movie has often been treated like a sacrilegious object by the studio. So what's the big deal? Well, how should I put this? The most famous cut scenes from the movie involve sexual acts performed by nuns. One involves a statue of Christ and the other involves a femur bone. I'll let your imagination take it from there. And I'm among the many who haven't actually seen those scenes for myself. Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff, and that is on top of a movie that is best known for its generally controversial nature anyway. Shocks aside, The Devils really is a pretty special movie in any form. I previously referred to it as one of the definitive erotic horror films, which honestly undersells its value as a commentary on society, religion, sex, and the humanity that runs through it all. So while you probably won't want to take the whole family to this one, we'll definitely be keeping an eye out for further details as The Devils nears its theatrical re-release later this year. Now, I'd just like to say, this movie is not blood and gore. It is not wall-to-wall sex. This is a very intellectual, very adult film that asks much of its audience. It is not a movie for people that like to sit down and munch their popcorn. It is a very intellectually, believe it or not, engaging film that has a lot to say and asks some tough questions of the audience. So it's not, by the way, what became, I think, famous. You know, it's not Black Narcissus, and it's certainly not the nunsploitation movies that were popularized in the 60s and, of course, 70s. So it's a different kind of movie, but I just want to stress that it's not the kind of movie that it's not exploitation cinema or even nuns-sploitation cinema, the way people think of it. It's a very, very interesting, very adult, and very compelling motion picture that I would recommend everybody who's interested in film see. Although, admittedly, it's very difficult these days to tell people to go see movies like this because it requires the kind of attention span. I've often said that watching movies is a skill. Anybody can sit down and watch movies. But to really understand movies like The Devils, it requires a little bit of knowledge on how to watch movies like this. And I know it's funny, some people have given me pushback when I say that kind of thing. But it is true. And it's not like a lot of the movies that have been released in the last 25 years are anything like The Devils. Although there have been some movies that rival it, I think, in certain ways. But Ken Russell was one of the great stylists. I mean, he's not even a director anybody today even talks about. But he's certainly had a great career. I don't know why, but I always thought of like Ken Russell and Nicholas Roeg as being like two brothers, even though they're not. But, I like their films, and we don't have anybody who's working in Hollywood today that's anything like Ken Russell. So I just wanted to point out, if it's not on your radar, it was a big announcement, big for film fans, big for physical media, and what a way for Warner Clockwork to come out of the gate. Really, really cool. And George Feltenstein apparently has said that no expense was spared by this release. I know that Bill Hunt at the Digital Bits spoke with him, and I think that like me, Bill thinks of this as a Grail title. It's one of those things that film fans have wanted to see for a long time, and I think it's great that we're finally getting it and seeing it come out. Now, there's no word yet, as the article said, who's releasing it. I don't know if BFI, the way that Criterion and BFI have been splitting up, say, the Kurosawa movies, I don't know if it's going to work that way. Maybe it will. It might get different releases in different countries. I don't know. But I can imagine it's going to come out in 4K, and it's probably going to be a spectacular disc. And I hope they include Kermode's documentary. I hope Mark Kermode's allowed to do an audio commentary as well, because along with The Exorcist, I never tire of listening to Mark Kermode talk about The Devils. So there you go. Very exciting stuff. If you're a film fan, really kind of neat. Now, that said, I've been looking for good things and good material to talk about. And I understand, I did not review Starfleet Academy. Everybody wanted me to review it. My non-review of it says everything that I need to say about that show. So I didn't review it as much as people wanted me to just go off on it. What do I think of the state of Star Trek now? Well, it's pretty sad. I'd like to see it come back. We shall see. You listened to a lot of our CinemaCon coverage, so, I talked about all the things that I was excited about there, and there is a lot. I keep thinking about, one of my favorite executives in Hollywood is who I like to call the quiet king of franchises over there at 20th Century Studios, president or co-president Steve Asbell. And I call him the quiet king of franchises because he's been responsible for bringing back everything from Hellraiser, and Alien, and Predator, and Planet of the Apes, and of course Devil Wears Prada 2. Don't forget that, which is a smashing success. They announced a new Planet of the Apes movie. I hope they call it Empire of the Planet of the Apes, or Empire of the Planet. Yeah, just Empire of the Planet, not the Empire. But one of the exciting things, Steve also has some original things up his sleeve with Whalefall. Looking forward to seeing Whalefall, based on the book of the same name. That footage at CinemaCon was bonkers. So, we talked about all that kind of stuff. And could I talk more about Avengers Doomsday? Yeah, but I've been trying to go light on the spoilers, even though I was trying to clarify something yesterday and it gets picked up. All fires, everything always. Thanks for the shout out, buddy. I appreciate it. Just clarification. But then somebody said today that I said that Steve Rogers was coming back dressed in as Captain America in a uniform. I never said that. Somebody asked me on Twitter if he was going to come back as Captain America, and I just said wait and see. Like, why can't everybody wait and enjoy themselves? And I am Team Doomsday. I think the movie's going to be a hoot. I can't wait to see how they pull it off. I'm deliriously excited for the film, and I've heard all the naysayers say whatever they want. But you've always heard me say that every great IP is only one movie or TV series away from greatness. Another thing that I might bring to your attention that is pretty interesting is, for you comic book fans out there, John Byrne, a couple of years ago, John Byrne, who really was the artist with Chris Claremont writing in one of the most definitive, back in the, 120s, I think, and onward, one of the most definitive X-Men comic eras ever, Well, John Byrne just started to, he threw out all the the continuity after he left, and he just started writing X-Men, writing and drawing an X-Men comic and like putting it up on his blog, and to the point where he's got a bunch of finished issues, and they're going to start releasing them in hardcover format, which I think is great. It's not canonical X-Men, but I guess it's alternative John Byrne universe X-Men. I'm a big John Byrne fan, so I'm really curious. I mean, he did crazy things with Star Trek, and I'm really curious to see what he's done, because I didn't go back and read all of his blogs. I want to read them because now they're colored, and I guess it's going to be great. I can't wait to pick that up. That was another thing that was announced this week already, and we're only at Wednesday. See, Surprise Day is truly Surprise Day. And something else, my good friend Alvaro Zinus Amaro, who you've seen on this channel, who has become really one of my dear and cherished friends. I can never tire of speaking with him. And you've seen him on the channel. You know I go to double features with him almost every week. He is also the author of this fantastic science fiction novel, also very 70s in its sensibility, Equimedian. Equimedian is a word that is, well, you have to read the book to find out. But you can get it on Amazon. This is the hardcover, and I would suggest picking it up. He's also written a great essay that's on the Lionsgate Limited website about Scream 4. Well, he always sends me his Substack articles. And his new Substack article, his Substack is called The Gulf of Selves. And he sent me a Substack article today, and I read it, and I'm like, well, now I know what I had to tell him that I said, look, I want to do this because I've got a lot of letters to read, which I will get to, but I wanted to read this article with Darth Maul Shadow Lord finishing up its run, which I very much enjoyed. I thought it was a terrific show, with a few exceptions, but we're going to get to that in a minute. So we'll check all that out. It's going to be very exciting, but I wanted to read this article he wrote in his Substack. And if you want to read really thoughtful commentary on science fiction and pop culture, his Substack, again, The Gulf of Selves, is definitely something you should subscribe to. And if you like his work, throw him a few bucks. Why not? Speaking of that, you can, Super Chats are open, and the tip link is down in the description. Tips are always better because, YouTube takes a lot. But anyway, let's jump into this article. And again, Alvaro wrote this, and I love all of his ideas. And this icons and modern myths, surface area is finite. And I thought to myself, the surface area of fandom, especially today, is certainly finite. So take it away, Alvaro. I just finished watching the first season of Star Wars MAUL Shadow Lord, and beyond the show's immediate merits, such as its spectacular animation and wonderful music, it got me thinking about icons in modern pop culture. This is a topic I've been considering for a while, and in what follows, I'm going to summarize a few ideas that I think may be useful when looking at the evolution of long-lived franchises. Pop icons. By icons in this context, I mean specific characters, lines of dialogue, scenes, pieces of invented technology, images, and so on that achieve critical mass resonance with audiences and enter into the broader landscape of common references. Some examples: Darth Vader's silhouette and breathing in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, or let's just call it Star Wars. Spock's Vulcan nerve pinch from Star Trek The Original Series. The red pill, blue pill choice in The Matrix. The DeLorean time machine in Back to the Future. Superman opening his shirt to reveal his suit's S in Superman. These iconic experiences, I think, are only fully realized in the context of the original stories to which they are attached, even if they later become prominent in pop culture consciousness in a way that minimizes those narratives. Eventually, if they're popular enough, they end up getting recycled in spin-off stories, skits, or even ads. I'd like to suggest a simple visual way of thinking about icons that I think helps clarify why certain modern franchises are exhibiting undeniable signs of fatigue. Imagine, in an abstract way, that pop culture icons are like three-dimensional objects. As such, they have a finite surface area. The more stories or takes attached to an icon, the more cluttered that surface area becomes. Once an icon's entire surface area has been used to adhere stories to it, the icon is difficult to see clearly. We only recognize the vague contours of its shape and have to fill in the rest with memory. An over-storyfied icon loses its recognizability and narrative luster. It becomes, metaphorically speaking, weighed down. Though I certainly enjoyed Star Wars MAUL Shadow Lord, I experienced that feeling while watching it. Darth Vader, lightsaber duels, etc. no longer have the effect they once did, no matter how impressively choreographed or technically sophisticated. The power of icons is diminished even further, in my opinion, when the stories attached to them are of the postmodern or deconstructionist variety. These not only barnacle on an icon's surface, but actually bore into its structure, weakening its integrity. Unlike classical myths, modern myths, as the name suggests, emerge from contemporary literature and pop culture. They fund classical myths by addressing our deep-seated anxieties, dilemmas, and aspirations, except in this case, they take their cues from modern society. Some of the characteristics of modern myths include they're constantly reinterpreted across different media. They lack a fixed moral message, allowing for multiple interpretations. They originate from specific literary works, but their mythic quality develops through cultural adaptation. They tap into unresolved human concerns, such as identity, technology, and power. Several examples along with their key themes: Frankenstein, scientific hubris, creation and responsibility; Dracula, fears of the foreign, sexuality, and power; The War of the Worlds, technological superiority, invasion anxieties; Sherlock Holmes, the ideal of pure reason; Batman, justice versus vigilantism in modern society. In The Modern Myths, Adventures in the Machinery of Popular Imagination, Philip Ball argues that these types of stories help society process new challenges, such as accelerating technological change, existential crises, or evolving social structures in a way that's analogous to how ancient myths explain the world to earlier cultures. Modern myths, Ball suggests, are not consciously created, but rather emerge organically through cultural engagement. It's worth pointing out that, quite rightly, not every mega-popular story qualifies for Ball as a modern myth. The themes and characters of Pride and Prejudice, for example, remain largely fixed. It lacks the ambiguity and adaptability characteristic of myths. Every adaptation of A Christmas Carol, to cite another classic, retains the same fixed moral arc of redemption, with Scrooge transforming from miser to benefactor. Myths, by contrast, allow for multiple evolving interpretations. How about Harry Potter? While highly influential, it does not introduce new mythic themes per se. Instead, it reworks familiar archetypes from older myths and legends. Now, let's tie this back to Star Wars. Despite its deliberate use of mythic structures throughout its many incarnations, its deliberately mythio-poetic engineering, if you will, Star Wars is, according to Ball, ultimately more of a pastiche than an organically emerging modern myth. He characterizes it as kind of a modern fairy tale, or a synthesis of pre-existing mythic strands. In other words, a modern way of recombining classic myths rather than a modern myth itself. Modern myths contain ingredients friendly to the fashioning of endlessly reinventing, self-perpetuating IPs. They're constantly reinterpreted across different media. As mentioned, they lack a fixed moral message, which is handy for story creation, and they tap into unresolved human concerns that will not be settled in the foreseeable future, so the tensions they address are perpetually in play. In other words, as story wellsprings, modern myths are extremely fluid, malleable. Pop iconography, on the other hand, in the sense I've been writing about, is hard and unyielding. An icon represents the distillation of various thematic and storytelling elements into a single, precise, emblematic shape. It's been forged and carved with precision and specificity. Some modern myths, unsurprisingly, tend to contain and even partially rely on instantly recognizable icons for their appeal. Characters like Dracula or the Frankenstein's monster. Tropes such as the masked vigilante or singular images like the famous bat signal. A lone detective in a trench coat is just an image until it's tied to the myth of Sherlock Holmes as the pure rationalist. A caped figure on a rooftop isn't interesting unless it's imbued with the Batman myth of justice, trauma, and vigilantism. Modern franchises, I contend, tend to fail, among other reasons, when they treat icons as infinitely extensible rather than as finite symbolic objects with limited storifiable surface areas. Within the framework we're discussing here, I think it's fair to say that Star Wars derives much of its popularity from a combination of its mythio-poetic structure and its memorable iconography. However, as I was mentioning with regards to MAUL Shadow Lord, that iconography is becoming exhausted. Surveying recent Star Wars history, I'd say that while the sequel trilogy from 2015 to 2019 and Disney Plus shows expanded the franchise, they've largely done so at the cost of coherence. Specifically, key icons like Luke Skywalker, the Force, and the Empire have become cluttered. The Force, for instance, once a mystical quasi-religious concept, has been piecemeal explained, retconned, and democratized. Its mythic resonance has been replaced with self-reverential nostalgia and deconstruction. Vader's redemption in Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi, to take another example, was once the definitive closure of his myth. Then Obi-Wan Kenobi in 2022 reopened the wound with new scenes. Boba Fett was a mysterious icon. Along comes the Book of Boba Fett, turning him into a talkative and mundane anti-hero. I am Boba Fett. And so on. These competing interpretations are basically trying to force Star Wars to become a modern myth, but with limited success. The icons of Star Wars have, in the process, been almost totally used up. Their surface is covered by too many conflicting perspectives and tones. And because the franchise's mythic core has become obscured by the preponderance of new material, it survives on nostalgia rather than cultural urgency. The lesson is pretty straightforward. Star Wars' most successful recent entries, The Mandalorian and Andor, thrive when they create new narratives unconcerned with the classic icons. There are two possible paths forward. One, create new icons within the universe and design them to be particularly well suited to its pre-existing mythio-poetic structure. Two, severely limit the number of stories that are allowed to attach themselves to the iconography. You can still create new stories that contribute to the overall structure of the universe, but they just can't be tied in a key way into the franchise's icons. I think James Gunn struggled with a similar situation with his rendition of Superman. We have 1, Superman the icon, and 2, Superman the modern myth. Casual viewers tend to conflate them, because Richard Donner gave us a beautifully idealized and poignant rendering of one inside a classical version of two. But they're distinct. Zack Snyder, on the whole, preserved the myth, but slanted the icon. Gunn's film goes to great lengths to move in the opposite direction, restoring the icon while tilting the myth. And I don't think it quite works, though the specifics of why would be enough for a whole separate essay. The Mandalorian, from 2019 to 2023, revived Star Wars to some extent by leaning into the Western samurai myth vibe, but as more episodes have been produced, even this new foundation started to sink. The more Mandalorian has leaned into specific iconography, the less interesting it has become. I'll be there on opening weekend, but I don't think this bodes particularly well for the upcoming The Mandalorian and Grogu. Regardless, I'm sure they'll try again. And who knows, they may eventually succeed. As Qui-Gon Jinn says in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, your focus determines your reality. So I want to thank Alvaro for allowing me to read this. I loved this essay. I mean, I'd never quite thought of things that way, but we talk about franchise fatigue, and I think he really nails it. The icon versus the modern myth. And I think what's really, really interesting is, and I was having a conversation with the Angry Badger, who I very much like. I think he's very smart and he really knows his stuff, but we always find ourselves at loggerheads when we talk about Star Wars. And what I've always found interesting about Star Wars is when Star Wars first came out, I saw Star Wars May 29th, 1977. I was 10 years old. And it literally changed my life. My friend Craig Hyland, who I was visiting up in Seattle, talked about how he had seen an early screening of the film because they had to show it to exhibitors in Washington State, and he went to a exhibitor screening, and he was so blown away that he was telling random passers-by on Seattle Metro buses how much they had to go see Star Wars. He never told me that story when I was up in Seattle with him last weekend. He's one of my oldest friends, and I was bemused by this because I've always thought of Craig Hyland as a relative misanthrope, and the idea of him walking up to perfect strangers going, "You have to go see this movie," was incredibly funny to me. So shout out to you, Craig. After I knew you, you'd never do something that crazy. But because of him, I have a lot of posters, including some amazing Star Wars posters, including original Star Wars A-style one-sheets and 30x40s. There's actually rolled original Star Wars posters and Empire posters and Empire Advance posters coming to your galaxy this summer. More on that, this amazing poster collection that are all, by the way, they are all original National Screen Service posters that were created by the National Screen Service Corporation. They are what are called, they're originals. They're not reproductions. People are making all kinds of laser reproductions of these posters. These are all original, and we will be selling hundreds and hundreds of items at, we're going to auction a few off, but then they're all going to be just buy at this price. And there's all kinds of movies from the 60s, 70s, and 80s for sale. You're going to get a kick out of what is up, and we're going to begin the items for auction this weekend are all Barbra Streisand movies. And when I say posters, movie posters are traditionally 27 by 41, but the National Screen Service Corporation, which were discontinued in about 1980, made all different size posters. They made inserts, which were like half one sheets. Then they made literally half sheets were like the bottom half of a movie poster. And then there were window cards, which were cards that you could put in coffee shops and things like that. And then there were 30 by 40s, and those are posters that are 41 inches by 81 inches. They're gigantic. There's a beautiful What's Up Doc poster that we're going to be auctioning off. And then there are 6 sheets, which are 81 inches by 81 inches. And because I talked about the Devils, I personally own a 24 sheet. What is that, you might ask? It is a billboard. I do, in fact, have a billboard for the Devils. So bring it all the way around. So look for that, and I'll have more information on that today and tomorrow when the things hit eBay in my store, which is a sub-store of my friend Gabe's. and Michelle's and their store is called Find Your Niche. And they're great sellers. But anyway, more about that later. But so the Angry Badger and I go on and on and on, and we argue about what Star Wars is. And in his mind, Star Wars is Jedis and the Force and the Sith and lightsabers and all of that. And I certainly would agree with him. But when you go back and you watch A New Hope that the Jedi and the Force and all that are in the background. Sure, remember, the Jedi are extinct. Their fire has gone out of the universe. And the only Jedis that are left are Kenobi. Well, we don't even know Yoda. He had yet to exist. All that we know is that Kenobi is an old Jedi and Vader's a Jedi. And Luke was apparently the son of a Jedi. That's all we know. So when Star Wars came out in 1977 and changed the world, Star Wars was not about the Jedi and the Sith and that ancient religion or Jedi Masters or any of that. It was about a boy, proxy for the audience, who wanted to get the fuck out of home. He wanted to get out of Dodge. I mean, he was farming moisture from the air. I can't imagine a worse job or a worse life than that. He went up to Tosche Station to pick up power converters, went to Anchorhead, he bullseyed Womp Rats in his T-16. You know, he was basically all of us, and he was a proxy for boys and girls. Any young person who's ever wondered, is this all that there is? You know, like what V'ger wondered. Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? Anybody who ever looked at the setting sun going, man, I got to get out of here. I need more from life. So Star Wars, the original, not A New Hope, it's just Star Wars when it came out. When you saw it, you were less concerned with Jedis and lightsabers and all that. Even though they were cool, they were in the background. That you could say, yes, but the idea of learning the Force could have been learning anything. It could have been learning a new skill. It could have been the code of Bushido. It was learning how to use a sword. All of that it was about, basically, the Force was enlightenment, which was knowledge. That's kind of how it came off when Star Wars first came out. And if you had faith in knowledge and faith in learning, you could get better. But if you really look at that film, it's about a young man or a young person leaving home for the first time. As they said in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, put one foot in front of the other. Soon you'll be walking out the door. You know what I'm saying? I'm a Jew and I can sing that song. But that was the thing. Getting out, getting into the world. And of course he got a little push when the stormtroopers killed Owen and Beru. But still, that's what Star Wars was about. And if you think about it, as we've talked about, Han Solo and Luke represent blue-collar America. Han was a truck driver. Luke was a farmer. They worked for a living. You know, and they met an old grizzled veteran of foreign wars who may as well just have been a hippie or a mystic. You know, certainly there's a little Gandalf in Ben Kenobi. But they went to rescue a princess. They went on a grand adventure. And while, yes, we were introduced to the idea of the Clone Wars and we were introduced to lightsabers, nobody ever thought, including George Lucas, that we would ever see anything more of Star Wars. George Lucas didn't expect it to even be successful. He did have Alan Dean Foster write Splinter the Mind's Eye as a low-budget potential sequel for Star Wars. But all the stuff that the Angry Badger loves, that came later as Star Wars expanded. So did it go from being an icon to becoming a modern myth? And then once it did, it all sort of got barnacleized. And what was really interesting is Star Wars excited so many people that everybody was chomping at the bit to tell their own Star Wars stories. One of the great things about Star Wars, it did the same thing that Star Trek did. I was already a fanatical... I was a fanatical Star Trek fan for half the time I was alive on Earth, which was 5 years, when I saw Star Wars. And I didn't think of them as the same thing at all. They both took place in space, but they were wildly different from one another, and I loved them both. Star Wars blew my mind, but then again, a year before Star Wars came out, Logan's Run blew my mind too. And that had some very heady science fiction concepts. But anyway, the thing about Star Wars to me, and as we saw, if anyone was looking at the things that were published on the 4th of this year, They were talking about what Star Wars projects are watched the most on Disney Plus. And the thing that isn't watched very much is the sequel trilogy. And the thing about the sequel trilogy is I mean, look, everyone went and saw The Force Awakens because everybody loves Star Wars. It made $900+ million domestically and $2 billion internationally because Star Wars hadn't been around for a while. It gave people our main characters back but never put them together. But I would say that I'm not here to bash on the sequel trilogy, but the reason that it doesn't have much rewatchability is it's not really about anything. It tries to be about Rey, and what we do is we're imposing Luke's story upon Rey, so we see that it's kind of there, and Poe is kind of Han Solo, and Finn could have been a great character, but they sort of left him by the wayside. So the problem with the sequel trilogy is there's really no story to follow. You're watching people, go through the motions, but at the end of the day, and I'm sure there's lots of people that it's silly to me to say whether you like The Last Jedi or not and The Rise of Skywalker is nonsense, but the problem is there's no focused story. There wasn't a focused story when Star Wars was made either. George Lucas can talk about the Journal of the Whills all he wants, but you know what? It was one movie. It was pared down, and they really worked it, and George had a lot of adults in the room with him, like his wife Marcia, who helped one of the 3 editors on that movie, pare it down into something that became what we knew and what we loved. But the problem is, in a world where Lord of the Rings was shot beginning in 1999 and gave us The Fellowship, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King that we saw that Peter Jackson made, once you live in a world where that trilogy, which was basically shot all at once, they had the book to go by, but once you live in that world and you've purchased Star Wars and you're going to make 3 movies, I think it's one of the greatest, perhaps one of the greatest derelictions of creative duty ever, to not have sat down with a brain trust and had the greatest writer's room ever assembled and write 3 scripts that worked, that told a story, and not retelling, not a thinly veiled remake of A New Hope. Because obviously Disney hoped to supplant old Star Wars with their new Star Wars that was their Star Wars, which that's kind of the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And again, I don't want to relitigate this because we've been talking about it for way too long on the internet. But how do you make a Star Wars movie and not put together your iconic characters? I guess that's what modern myth making is all about. Let's deconstruct and change and subvert the audience's expectations. Or you're just stupid. But then again, I think Carrie Fisher's death really threw a wrench into the proceedings. I do think that if they had made the Duel of the Fates script, that I can remind you that I was one of the first people on the internet to even talk about, because that script was leaked to me specifically to do a show about it, which I'm still tickled about to this day. And by the way, that's not what happened with the Avengers Doomsday script. Nobody leaked it to me. But anyway, I think that it's unfortunate because Star Wars is a barnacle, as Alvaro put it, a barnacle-encrusted franchise, as is Star Trek, as is Doctor Who, as is James Bond. The iconography and the iconic status of all of these things, this weird notion that we have to subvert expectations and we have to make James Bond a mopey guy, and in the end he sacrifices himself because his DNA won't let him be around the woman he loves, and all this craziness, and the timeless children, or whatever the fuck that Doctor Who retcon was, and all this ridiculousness. We talk about it a lot. But the problem is, and I think Alvaro addresses all of this, is when you try and change icons into something else, it simply doesn't work. Now, you can reinvent ideas, like we've seen many different derivations of Sherlock Holmes. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. But I've liked a lot of them. I've enjoyed them. for their own sake, because the people, like when you watch a Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law, you're getting a new interpretation of it that doesn't supplant the old interpretation. Nobody's sitting there going, well, this is not Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. Everyone knows it's a new thing. And they ask themselves, does this succeed as a new thing? And I would say, yes, it does. But when you look at what they tried to do with the Star Wars sequel trilogy, they hoped that that would supplant the original thing. You can't do that. That doesn't work. It's never worked. And the same thing happened with Star Trek. Oh, let's go back to the prequels and let's retell a bunch of stories. The problem is the creators that are working on these things aren't nearly as talented as the people that created them in the first place. All they do is they take the iconography of it all and they're going to change it and make it their own. Doesn't ever work. Doesn't work. When you try that and you're not the creator or you have no ties to the creator, you can't help but bring presentism into the whole thing, and it all collapses under its own weight. Because when something was created in a different time, the DNA of that thing carries with it the time in which it was created. And when you're trying to change that, sometimes it can work, I suppose. I mean, there's been very many reinterpretations of Dracula, but the best interpretations are they keep the core of it. You know, they don't try and... I mean, sometimes you could say, okay, the Frank Langella, the John Badham Dracula, that was a derivation of the play, turned him more into a romantic figure. But those elements existed in Dracula in the first place as well. And depending on how far away you stray, look, do I like what they've done to the vampire mythology? Yes. But the character of Dracula, you know, it works, but the closer you skew or hew to the original of what Dracula can be, I think it gets better and better and better. Now, if you want to do a modern interpretation, if you look at vampirism and say, okay, what if vampirism is real? It's not supernatural. I don't find that vampires can still have that iconic status. You're just playing with the reasoning behind it. And I don't have a problem with that, because then you can get banger movies like Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, or you can get Tony Scott's The Hunger, based on the Whitley Strieber novel, if that's what you want. Maybe I'm contradicting myself. But anyway, when it comes to things like Star Wars, you know, you have people wanting to make the Acolyte again and change it to their whims. And while I do admit that there's some cool stuff in that show, it's far away from Star Wars. I also think that, like, Ahsoka is far away from Star Wars as well. But anyway, what do you all think about this? Put your comments and commentary into the chat or into things below. And I'd be very curious to hear what you think of all this. Now, because I've been away for a long time, I have a lot of letters people have written to me, and I want to get through those, but I also want to see if you guys... Robservations kicks ass. Happy birthday. Well, thank you. Cyanagiri says, well, he's been a member for 42 months. So thank you for that. I very much appreciate it. So, very exciting. So, is the show... Okay, the show's still going. I was like, did the encoder go away? But anyway, so thank you for that. And thanks for all the birthday wishes. My actual birthday is May 15th. That's coming up in 11 days. So there you go. Now, I want to jump in and I want to read letters. And I welcome everybody to send me letters. I haven't read any in a month, so I've got a few. If you want to send me a letter, you can see right down there. Just put Robservations in the subject line and maybe what you want it to be about and who you're from, who it's from. So I'm going to start with Ruben Hilbers. Ruben Hilbers says, for crying out loud, Rob, sink the frackin' moon already. Hi, Rob, and the good people of the Post-Geek Singularity. So, a long time ago, Ronald D. Moore of Star Trek The Next Generation, Battlestar Galactica, Outlander and For All Mankind fame, said that he would love to redo Space 1999. I love Space 1999, at least the first season. But the premise was simply too weird. And I will admit that Space 1999 had issues with scientific accuracy. The breakaway explosion in the pilot episode would have simply vaporized Moonbase Alpha or broken the moon completely. And that's just for starters. The beauty of rebooting a reimagining show, however, is that you can fix stuff like that. So let's move on how to do that. Well, it's already in the title of this letter. Sink the frackin' moon. In Deep Space Nine's pilot Emissary, the crew has to figure out how to fly the titular space station from Bajor to the wormhole. So they create a subspace field around the station, which dials down the gravity's pull on the station and allows its thrusters to do the job. All you have to do is dial that up to 12. How? Well, come up with some technobabble backstory and boom! Suddenly the breakaway explosion creates a particle surge, the surge creates a subspace rift, and the moon sinks into subspace. And ta-da! Now you can have the moon bounce between subspace and normal space whenever the plot requires it. Hell, you can have a MacGuffin that, properly written, will explain whatever you need it to. Alternate universes, time travel, horrible creatures from dark places, the list goes on. Especially if later seasons see the crew of Moonbase Alpha try and control this bounce. Sci-fi, after all, loves an experiment gone wrong. So, Rob, sink the frackin' moon already. Thoughts? Ruben Hilbers. Well, Ruben, what a great letter. Now, I love Space 1999. I'm sure some of you out there are wondering what the hell is Space 1999. Well, Space 1999 was the second live-action, big-budget science fiction television series that came to us from Jerry Anderson, he of Supermarionation fame. He, of course, if you remember, this was British, but he created things like Supercar, and he created Fireball XL5, and Stingray, and the Thunderbirds, and Captain Scarlet, and Joe 90, and then later the Terrahawks. But in 1969 through 1971, he made a TV show that is dear to my heart called UFO. And UFO was about a super secret multinational organization called Shadow, the Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization. And the nations of the world had teamed up, and they created all kinds of super vehicles with their super science. They built a secret moon base to fight a covert war against aliens that had been visiting Earth and were kidnapping people and using body parts to save their dying race. And I dearly loved this show when I was a kid. It scared the hell out of me. It had great Barry Gray music, and the vehicles and things that Shadow used to fight the aliens were irresistible. You can see the show streaming some places, and of course I've got 3 different box sets of the series on disc, one from the UK, one from Japan, and one from Australia. It's a fantastic series. It was very expensive to produce. There were 26 episodes in only one season, but then the show was retooled and became Space 1999, which was going to be the second season of UFO, but they changed it. And Space 1999, UFO takes place in the early 70s, and the show is basically set in 1980. Space 1999, of course, is set after that, 19 years later. But in Space 1999, the premise is the moon. We've been storing nuclear waste on the far side of the moon, and the nuclear waste ends up exploding and blowing the moon out of Earth's orbit, and the 311 souls that remain on board Moonbase Alpha travel around the lost moon and have adventures. Now, let's just say a nuclear explosion could actually do that. The moon would be stuck in our solar system for a very long time. And the idea that it could go anywhere interesting is silly in itself. But if you watch Space 1999's first season, you get to the penultimate episode that was actually filmed last, The Testament of Arcadia, there's some really interesting ideas that maybe the moon's journey is being helped along by some supreme intelligence, maybe God, maybe aliens. You don't really know. But that I could buy. So I like your idea, Ruben. And maybe I've retconned in my head that the moon was thrown into subspace, and it gets brought out of subspace with the intervention of these beings. Maybe they're the people that created the Cylons in Battlestar Galactica. Who knows? I don't know. Well, actually, the humans did, but the people overseeing the humans and the Cylons, because it's all happened again. It's all happened before and it will happen again. So, very interesting letter. Thank you for writing in. DUI Champ says, I hate to disagree, but claiming Strange New Worlds doesn't work really mean it doesn't work for you. I've been all over the country in 2025, and like Highlanders, Trekkies know Trekkies, haven't met a Strange New Worlds hater yet. Well, that doesn't mean that they're not all wrong. Look, I don't hate Strange New Worlds, but it's a terrible prequel to Star Trek. It doesn't work. None of it makes any sense. The timeline doesn't work. What they've done to the Gorn doesn't work. The fact that you have half the crew of the Enterprise, the original Enterprise, like Uhura is a lieutenant, or she's a yeoman, or she's a new cadet on the Enterprise, none of it works. People like Strange New Worlds because it feels comfortable to them, not because it's good. It's a show that's based around Anson Mount because everyone likes him from Star Trek Discovery. They ruined the character of Spock. They ruined things like the Gorn. I could go on, but people have heard me say it. And I understand people like it because it feels comfortable. But it's not good. It's not good. And it's not good necessarily. It's not because it's just me. Look, lots of people like things these days that are mediocre. People don't demand a lot from their science fiction. But, and they certainly don't demand very much from their Star Trek lately. Don't get mad. You knew I was going to say that. I mean, you do have a Star Trek The Motion Picture insignia as your avatar. The Deadman 79 says, Moon 02 is one of my favorite cheesy movies. I like Moon 02, and if you like Space 1999, Catherine Schell is in that movie, as you know. Moon 02 is sort of a Western on the moon, kind of. But I like Moon 02 as well. You know, it's funny, people don't... I wonder if science fiction fans of today can go back. I mean, I grew up with these movies. The difference, it's hard to explain this to people now, but I was lucky to be born in a place where I could watch the evolution of all this stuff. When I was born, Star Wars didn't exist. Alien didn't exist. And to watch those things happen and to watch the evolution of visual effects and to see, you know, motion control cameras and how they were used. The Dijkstraflex camera that was invented for Star Wars, when computers could control multiple passes of a camera past a model, which really allowed special effects to be done that couldn't have been done in the past. It's been really interesting to watch, and going from Star Wars in 77 to the summer of 82, which was, if you watch Greatest Geek Year Ever, the summer of 82 within the space of 2 months. Let's say it with me now. In America, we had The Road Warrior, Conan the Barbarian, Star Trek II, Poltergeist, E.T., Blade Runner, and The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing opened on the same day. Tron came out. Megaforce was in there, but we'll forgive that. All within basically a month and a half. Those were heady days, but those were all the results of what we saw happen in Star Wars. You went from Star Wars to Superman the movie to Alien to The Empire Strikes Back. Crazy, crazy time. Crazy time. But to go through that evolution was very, very interesting. And we learned a lot. And I think one of the reasons people like Strange New Worlds more than they should, they don't read anymore. They don't read science fiction. And I think that's problematic because Star Wars and Star Trek in those days, I mean, a lot of people didn't like Star Wars because they were big science fiction readers, but what Star Trek turned me into was a science fiction, well, Star Trek in the Twilight Zone turned me into a sci-fi reader. And it's amazing how Star Trek stories hold up. Strange New Worlds, not so much. If you're a science fiction reader, Star Trek Strange New Worlds just pisses you off. Robert Coleman writes in, and this letter's a little over a month old, so Mr. Coleman, I apologize. Hey, Rob, I hope all is well, brother. I wanted to get your perspective on remastered physical media. Although this question probably is better suited to your physical media show with Dieter, I'm hoping you can address it here, and so I will. So I just revisited Total Recall from 1990 after having not seen it since the VHS days. I know it was remastered from the original 35mm negative, which is how it should be done. While watching it, to my eyes, it just didn't look right. Last year, I had the same exact experience with The Thing. This time the color didn't look right. Now here's the thing. I recently rewatched a 35mm scan of both films that I found online that had not been remastered at all. And you know what? With all the imperfections and artifacts speckled throughout and all the snaps, crackles, and pops on the soundtrack, it was a wonderful viewing experience, as to my mind, this is how older films should look. What I'm learning is that just because a film is scanned for the original negative, which is great for capturing the natural grain inherent in a film, it's the recolor grading digitally that, to my eyes, makes the film look bad. The boosting of contrast too much and the changing of skin tones alter the original mood of the film, in my opinion. I'm under the impression that these remastered versions reflects what the studio thinks looks good now, not what audiences originally saw. The overprocessing of these films with the use of DNR to remove grain and thus making faces look plastic, the edge enhancements and over-sharpening of images to fix the smooth images due to the DNR and the HDR tweaks all cause the film to look unnatural. I don't believe an old film should be made to look like a modern film. It's one thing to use all these modern tools to save a film and bring it back to life, especially if it's an older film that has fallen through the cracks of time and on the verge of becoming extinct. Yet at the same time, film preservation also means preserving a film in the way it was originally made. Saving grain is good for 35mm films, but all the other stuff they do, the color regrade, HDR tweaks, and edge sharpening, etc., I feel is really doing a disservice to the fans who love those films and to the folks who worked on those films. Would you not be insulted if you were the cinematographer of a film in the 80s and the director decades later says, this film is too grainy, we need to DNR and remove it? After all the hard work you did? Maybe I'm just taking this too personally. It's just that I totally believe in preserving films as originally intended and find all of this frustrating as a fan. Your thoughts? Thanks, and rock on, brother. Okay. Well, first of all, Robert, I have to say, you talked about watching movies on VHS. VHS is the NTSC video format and basically had 640 by 480 pixels. And most of the time it was less. This is a horrible video format. Also, it could never recreate reds, blacks, or blues properly. So what you're talking about, the way you remember films, and I hear this a lot of the way most people remembered films as they grew up watching VHS tapes, they watched them on cable. With the worst video standard ever. France had there's CCAM was France, and the UK had PAL, which ran at a different frame rate, but it had a lot better resolution. Now, Blu-ray has a resolution that is 6 times better than VHS, and 4K, I'm oversimplifying here, is 4 times better than Blu-ray in terms of its pixels and in terms of its detail. So I understand what you're saying, but you're talking about bad transfers. See, the problem is, once you have resolution that's that good, remember, the medium of watching something digitally or electronically was very different than seeing light shine through celluloid projected at 24 frames a second and watching it on a screen. It's a whole different ball game. And the way colors are reproduced electronically, very, very different. As everybody knows, there's CMYK, there's RGB, different colors, different temperatures, just different kinds of color. And that's one medium to another. Now, here's the thing. There was thought when we adopted the HD standard, like when you put up a movie like a Pixar movie, like a Toy Story. Well, Toy Story was not photochemically made. It was not actually shot on film. So when you see the colors on a Toy Story or a digitally created animated film, it looks incredible. There's no grain because the movie wasn't shot. So grain is a function that you literally have a photochemical process happening, and every single frame is different. There's grain patterns as structure. That's just what photography is. So that's what grain is. Grain was inherent. Now, here's the thing. when you're watching a movie on a screen that's projected, there was always grain there, but we're not really seeing it. If you want to look at the grain, you want to look for it, it's there. But what you're seeing, because you're sitting back, your eyes are adjusting to the image itself. You're not really looking at the grain, even though it's always there. Now, the color reproduction on film and celluloid, as you're watching light projected through it, is incredibly different than what it's like to watch something electronically. So the thing is, when you have these beautiful 4K transfers, the best 4K transfers are what you're looking for. What I'm looking for is they most faithfully duplicate the negative, what's there. Now, the negative is hopefully what the printed negative is what the filmmakers wanted. Now, that's what you always strive for. Now, there's always going to be grain there, but there was thinking when the high definition standards were adopted and we started getting Blu-rays and then later 4Ks that, people weren't going to like grain. And indeed, there are people that don't like grain. They expect everything to look like a Pixar movie. But that's usually because they're younger and they were not educated as to because they never really, movies have changed in the last 25 years. Now, most movies, aside from Christopher Nolan or Tarantino movies, most movies now are shot digitally. Greg Fraser shoots things digitally and uses a process where he makes sure, prints things out to film. He has various processes he uses to give it a film look. You can also digitally add grain, but I'm not a big fan of that, but you can, and have it and give it that look, that alive look. But when you're making transfers, they're all over the place because a lot of the time the people that shot the movies and even the director of the film are no longer with us. What we want is the most faithful, in my mind, reproduction of what the film originally looked like when it was in theaters. But by your own admission, you're remembering what the film looked like on VHS, which, my friend, is not the way to remember a film, nor should you ever try and color time a movie to duplicate what it looked like on VHS, because you couldn't even have good reds, blacks, and blues. So what you saw on VHS looked terrible. We just didn't know it yet, And I think, like you said, I think the remastering of Total Recall and John Carpenter's The Thing, the 4K discs, I think they look spectacular. If you go to a channel called The Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader, he talks a lot about various, he just destroys transfers, and sometimes deservedly so. Sometimes I think he takes things a little too personally because he has to remember that we are watching things in a different medium. But there's a lot of good information there, so Damn Fool Idealistic Crusader, you go right on quoting regulations. But anyway, so I would say this. We live in a time where we're getting the best versions of films, sometimes that we're ever going to see, and a lot of time they're better than they were because you're seeing dupes and you're seeing a print that's removed. Every print looked different because of the way it was made. So the eating is good now. But yes, I agree. The transfers are all over the place. When you see something that has too much teal and orange, that's not good. While I think like something like my beloved Basic Instinct looks better now in 4K than it's ever looked on home video, I'm not sure I dig the color timing that Studio Canal did, and then Lionsgate inherited that transfer. However, if you look at a movie like Die Hard had a hard time on home video because the way it was shot, the way it was filtered, Jan de Bont's photography. It's never looked better on home video than it does on its 4K disc. So, totally different kinds of things. But anyway, I want to thank you for writing the letter. That's a great letter. This next letter comes from a short one. Ryan Castaneda says, "Good morning, Mr. Burnett. I've been a long-time viewer and listener to your podcast, and I genuinely believe you're one of the great ones in the industry." Well, thank you. I appreciate that. While I may disagree with some of your opinions, perfectly understandable, I find your insights on pop culture, cinema, and politics to be incredibly fascinating. I don't hear that very often. People are always like, stick to politics. Stick to film, don't talk politics. And I'm like, are the people that always say this, I want to ask them, are you political science majors? How would you know if my political takes are good or not? You just disagree with me. But I want to thank you that you find my political and pop culture cinema takes to be incredibly fascinating. I appreciate that. That's all anyone can ask. I hope this letter finds you well and it provides you with some valuable perspectives. And here is the letter that he sent me. The Last Philosopher, a letter on Jor-El, by Ryan Castaneda. Ever since I was a boy, Superman has been my favorite character. At first, it was simple. Strength, flight, the idea that someone could show up and make things right. But as I got older, late high school, early college, my faith started to take shape, and I couldn't help but notice the parables. Superman began to feel less like a hero and more like a symbol, almost a Christ-like figure. I remember watching Man of Steel, and there's a moment an interviewer asking, is he some sort of Jesus figure? That question stuck with me, because maybe he wasn't sent here to rule, maybe he was sent here to serve, to do good simply because it's right. That idea pulled me deeper. But the more I studied philosophy, the more I sharpened my thinking around logic, reason, and truth, something shifted. My favorite character stopped being Superman. It became his father, Jor-El. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's a thought I can't shake about Jor-El. He isn't just the last philosopher of Krypton. He might be the philosopher of the entire DC universe. And I don't say that lightly. Because Krypton wasn't a failed civilization. It was a brilliant one. Advanced, structured, intelligent beyond measure. And still, it died. Not from ignorance, but from a collapse in reason. That's the part that hits. Krypton didn't fall because they lacked knowledge. They fell because they stopped thinking clearly when it mattered most. They had data, but no discernment. Knowledge, but no wisdom. Consensus, but no truth. And standing in the middle of all that was one man who refused to lie to himself. Jor-El. Not louder than the council, not more powerful than the system. Just anchored in something deeper. Logic that couldn't be negotiated, and reason that couldn't be bent by comfort. If you've studied philosophy, you've met this man before. You've seen him in Socrates, questioning a society too confident to question itself. You've seen him in Marcus Aurelius, holding on to truth while everything around him fractures. You've seen him in Jeremiah, a warning of people who refuse to listen. And maybe most clearly you've seen echoes of him in Jesus Christ. Not in power, but in posture. The willingness to stand in truth even if it isolates you. To act for a future you won't live to see. A sunset you won't live to see. To become a vessel for something greater than yourself. That's Jor-El. And here's the realization that changed everything for me. Jor-El just didn't save his son. He built the framework of the entire universe. The guardrails, the rules, the moral gravity everything else orbits around. Truth over ego, reason over denial, responsibility over power. That's the foundation. That's why Superman works. Because he's not just powerful, he's grounded in something that was thought through, tested, sacrificed for. Jor-El didn't send Kal-El to rule. He sent him to represent what Krypton failed to become. Now here's where it might get a little controversial, but I think it needs to be said. There's been talk and interpretations, especially around newer directions, like the Superman James Gunn, that reframed Jor-El's message. Ideas that maybe Kal-El was sent not just to live amongst us, but to rule over us, to rebuild Krypton through dominance, to impose order, even to the extent of reshaping humanity itself. And if that's the foundation, then the entire philosophical structure collapses, because the moment Jor-El's intention shifts from reason and responsibility to control and domination, everything breaks. Not gradually, immediately, like a house of cards, because now Superman isn't a symbol of truth, he's a tool of ideology. Now his strength isn't guided by reason, it's justified by power. And without that original foundation, without those guardrails, the entire universe loses its center. no moral gravity, no philosophical anchor, no reason to believe in him beyond force. That's not Superman. And that's definitely not Jor-El. Because Jor-El understood something deeper. You can't build a future on power alone. You build it on truth. And truth doesn't need to dominate. It needs to be lived. Which brings it back to us. Because if you're really paying attention, we're not that different from Krypton. We have more information than ever before and somehow less clarity. We bend logic to fit narratives. We trade reason for comfort. We avoid truth when it costs too much. And in that kind of world, the rarest thing isn't intelligence. It's clear thinking under pressure. Jor-El had that. Which is why I can't just call him the last philosopher of Krypton anymore. That feels too small. He represents something bigger. The man who proved that logic and reason, when followed all the way through, will isolate you, but they will also make you effective. And maybe that's the real weight of his story. The ones who see clearly don't always get to stay. They don't always get to win. They don't even always get to be understood. But they get to shape what comes next. No applause, no validation, no guarantee it even works. Just truth, carried forward by conviction. And maybe the real tragedy isn't that no one listened to Jor-El. It's that most people wouldn't recognize him, even if he was the one who gave their world its meaning in the first place. You know, it's letters like this that make me happy I have this YouTube channel. If this is the kind of commentary that my viewers give, then this is the nourishment that I need and hope I can bring to the audience at large. Because what a great, thoughtful letter. You can find Ryan at ryancastaneda.com. It's one word, capital R in Ryan, capital CASTANEDA.com. ryancastaneda.com, portrait photographer. Give him a holler and tell him you heard me read his great letter on this show. Well, Ryan, I think you're absolutely right. And when you have all kinds of crazy competing ideologies that are trying to supplant the truth, you're in big trouble. And I think that's where we are now. And you know what? I mean, I can't help but hear people are waiting for the truth, in the Spielberg's Disclosure Day trailer. But I love this idea that Jor-El both has something to say to our real world and also the DC universe. What a great letter. I want to thank you for writing in. That is terrific. DUI Champ says, here's how not mad at you I get. I'm in crime-ridden South Wilkes Barre, junkies twirling through the store, and I'm pitching your show to the staff. Well, I appreciate that, DUI Champ. Look, lots of people love Strange New Worlds, and I totally understand why. I really do. It is comfort food, and people think it's just like the original Star Trek, because most people don't see Star Trek the way I see Star Trek. And I'm not saying that I see Star Trek in the right way, but I think that I have a problem in that I take it a lot more seriously than most people do. And I think the people that watched it at the time that I was watching it took it seriously as well. I was very serious about Star Trek, even as a 5-year-old. It's never gone away. But I appreciate that. Where is South Wilkes Barre? Is that Australia? It sounds like it's in the outback. But I don't know. This one comes from Brian Whitburn. Brian Whitburn writes in and says, "Hi, Rob. As I type this, I'm watching your video from 4 days ago titled, 'For All Mankind Boldly Goes Into.' The reason for my email, other than to tell you how much I'm enjoying your content, is to give you my thoughts on the following, hoping for your reply. I'm enjoying the video so far, and I appreciate your perspective on filmmaking, science fiction, and a common sense approach to how we look at our world. I started watching your videos after seeing you on the John Campea show, and you became my favorite part of his show. I also very much enjoyed your interview with the director and cast of Monument. I loved your response to the person who wants to become a film director. I thought that was great advice. Although I recommend studying film in college, I love that in today's age, the aspiring director has access to so much free content and technology to be able to learn the craft without paying school, much more than I did in the early 90s. Me too. I very much appreciated your reading the letter from the fan that was disappointed by his reaction to Project Hail Mary. I'm in that boat. I love the movie and don't understand why softy me didn't cry or didn't get emotional at all, while other movies get to me. Softy is a reference to James Gunn's Superman, which did get me tearing up. My thought was that maybe the hype of Project Hail Mary got to me, giving me an unrealistic expectation, or, as your viewer stated, maybe my emotional or tired state affected my viewing. I don't know. I do want to see it again to see if I view it differently. I completely agree with you regarding The Martian. I love The Martian. Each time I watch it, preferring the extended cut, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. I love the extended cut because I love all those characters. Maybe I thought Project Hail Mary would be more like The Martian. As you stated in your video, Project Hail Mary may have relied too much on humor and the sidekick cuteness factor of Rocky. I don't really know. But all that being said, I'm glad the movie watchers are paying to see it in theaters. Smart science fiction, regardless of how it affects me. What often happens is that my favorite movies each year aren't necessarily popular. Superman, The Fall Guy, Argyle, Free Guy, and The Wild Robot. So it's sad for me that I don't have that excitement about Project Hail Mary I had for those other movies. I love Star Trek, especially the original series and Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm sad that you didn't enjoy Strange New Worlds. I love the adventures of Captain Pike and crew. For me, that series feels like Star Trek for the first time since the original series and Next Gen. I admit that this last season wasn't as good as the first two, but I love it anyway. Okay, let me ask you this. If you know that the third season isn't as good as the first two, why do you love it anyway? That's always a question I ask. I like Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, but I found the third season inexplicable. And I have to ask myself, what the fuck happened? It's the same people, right? But I get it. The episodic nature of the show creates a great mix of fun, horror, action, comedy, and drama, but still keeps the characters' storylines throughout the series. It's the only Star Trek since 2009 that I feel is the exception to your concerns about the quality of Star Trek since 2009. But I also enjoyed Lower Decks, but I agree it's really for fans of Star Trek. While I enjoyed Picard, I was frustrated that Season 3 pretended like Season 2 didn't exist. For instance, at the end of Season 2, how were we friends with the Borg with a new queen, but then in Season 3 the original queen is back? I also didn't feel Picard's development as a character in Season 3 didn't extend from his growth in Season 2. Maybe I missed something. That's certainly possible. Anyway, thank you for reading this. I hope it wasn't too long of a letter. I very much enjoy hearing your perspective on movies and our world, and I look forward to seeing more of you on your channel and on John's show. May God bless you and God bless America. I hope that you have a great day. Brian. Well, Brian, thank you. What a great letter. I really like, again, thoughtful letters, Brian Whitburn. And I really appreciate you writing in. Great letter. Yeah, I guess I'm hard on things. I really love For All Mankind. Some people don't like the soap opera nature of it, but I think that the conceit of the show going forward about 10 years every season has been great. And I've really liked seeing the potential because the underlying principle, or not principle, but the underlying, I think, idea of For All Mankind is look what we could have done. And it always makes me look and ask ourselves, why aren't we there? Why didn't we allow NASA to patent their own inventions to become a self-financing space agency? Why the idea, I always say this to Alvaro. I say that life is a continuum. And the money that we're going to spend on one endeavor should not be thought of as taking money away from, say, helping the poor or helping education. All of it is necessary. The continuum. The very worst thing that's happening is happening at the same time the very best thing is happening. That's what life is. And we have to start thinking about it in those kinds of terms. And that's what I've always thought. But I just think that I feel that modern these modern franchise shows, modern Star Trek does not take itself seriously. It fails to create a credible universe I can inherently believe in. So that's why I don't like it. And Lower Decks, while it's fun, it feels like everybody on that show is a Star Trek fan. So, but anyway, I really like your letter, and I very much appreciate you taking the time to write in. That's very nice of you to do so. Now, here's a man we haven't heard from in a long time. Omar 94. How you been, Omar? It's been a while. Hi, Rob, moderators, and the Post-Geek Singularity. It's been a while since I wrote a letter. It has been a minute. I've seen the show sporadically, but not on the level before, due to being at work, which I both get up and go to bed early for. I'll try keeping and writing letters as best I can. I've been thinking about how films like Super Mario Galaxy Movie, Avengers Doomsday, and Avengers Secret Wars are discussed regarding how many characters there are. I've gone in a different approach. Characters help get the story across from one point to the next. However, I've noticed when some characters are superfluous, as they add nothing, or their actions can be done by another. I noticed it in Eternals, which I did like overall, but felt Kit Harington could have been removed due to adding nothing. He has no integral role. All he does is try and learn more about Gemma Chan's character, Cersei, and while there's that post-credit scene with the sword, that plot line went nowhere. Yeah, he should have become an Avenger. The Black Knight. No Time to Die, which I disliked overall, but I enjoyed the Cuban mission part, but I took issue with Ana de Armas, who I have nothing against, but felt she could have been cut out too, as her role could have been done by Jeffrey Wright's character, Felix Leiter. But could it, though? I love Jeffrey Wright, and I love his Felix Leiter, but Ana de Armas kicked ass in that role. Who was sidelined only to be killed. She's only involved for one sequence and then gone, as she doesn't appear or get mentioned again. I think it makes more narrative sense if Felix Leiter did the mission, as he approached Bond about the mission, and he's a spy, so he could have easily done that Cuban mission with Bond. It makes his death more impactful since he had more screen time, and he's Bond's only real friend, and he's mentioned several times after his death. It would also have made a great action sequence with Bond and Leiter working together, like the opening of License to Kill. Those are just some examples where certain characters are superfluous in movies and can be removed due to either not adding anything or the actions easily being done by someone else. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, Omar, it's great to hear from you. Haven't heard from you in a while. I agree with some of that. Like, I do think Ana de Armas, like when a character is globe-trotting, you meet people in one country, and then you leave. And what's important is to see how you use that character. I would love to have seen Ana de Armas come back in another Bond film. I mean, maybe she will. You know, who knows? Continuity has never been the Bond film's strong suit. So, but I get what you're saying. But don't you think the movie is far more entertaining watching Daniel Craig and Ana de Armas kick ass than it would be to have Jeffrey Wright and Bond kick ass? And I also think that Jeffrey Wright is not the kind of operator that Bond is. I mean, maybe he is, but I see him more as a spy rather than somebody who can do what Bond can do. So I don't know how successful it would have been to watch them team up. But I understand what you're saying. I do. This letter comes from Dale Cooper. Well, Diane, it's good to hear from you, Dale. Hello, Rob. I haven't seen you discuss either of these shows on your channel before. Have you gotten a chance to check out HBO's Rome or HBO's Deadwood? If you're hungry for good television, they're worth checking out. They're older, but brilliant. Rome is seen by many as the prototype for Game of Thrones, with its well-written political intrigue and deeply layered characters with an incredibly immersive setting. At the time it premiered, it was the most expensive show ever made. Well, Dale, both of those shows, both Rome and Deadwood, are, again, HBO bangers, are both great. Deadwood and the subsequent movie is a terrific show. And, you know, you see a lot of what Taylor Sheridan did in both of those shows. Rome was incredible, too. Like, one of my favorite things that's ever been on TV is the original BBC I, Claudius, which is hard for people to watch now because of the production values, because it also was shot on videotape and looks like a soap opera. But the actors and the intrigue. I loved all of that. So Rome was right up my alley. It was like catnip to me. I loved it, and it was a bummer that it only ran 2 seasons. But it was hideously expensive. So I get why it was short-lived. And, Deadwood, hardcore, combining, the modern sensibilities into a Western. It was great. Ian McShane was great. I loved Deadwood. It was hardcore. It showed the Old West in a more Clint Eastwood, Unforgiven vibe. I loved it. Both of those shows are great. Watch them in their first run. Watch them. They were terrific. So you're absolutely right. And I loved them. So, I could probably go into them in depth, in some detail. Now you've made me want to rewatch both of those shows. Victor Griggs writes in, the Vicster. What's going on, dude? Victor wrote, "Hey Rob, hope all is well. Thank you for your well wishes on my birthday. Very much appreciated, my friend. I want to talk about the Artemis 2 mission. It fills me with awe and wonder. It made me giggle like a little child and cry from watching Victor pilot the Artemis ship to watching them take pictures from space. And when they named a moon crater after Carol, Commander Reed Wiseman's wife, forget about it. I lost it, and I bawled like a baby. I never thought I would see something like that in my lifetime. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the mission and how you felt. Much love always, Victor. P.S. As you can see, I wrote a blog about Artemis, the Artemis 2 mission. Feel free to check it out if you want." Well, you're a great writer, Victor, and a great friend. And it's, what I love the most? I like to see all the people on social media that were really, really excited about the mission. And it was spectacular. I grew up with the Apollo program when I was a kid. The last time we did go to the moon, land on the moon, was 1972, and I was 5. I started watching Star Trek and Twilight Zone around that time, and it was spectacular to see. And, there's a lot of cynicism surrounding it, like, why do that? And people are like, why didn't you just land? Well, they didn't have a lander. But, there's a lot of stupidity out there, but still, I thought the whole thing was a credit to all of humanity. It was very exciting. There's an incredible video that was put up today because NASA keeps dumping photos online. And I want to say I put it on my Facebook page. This guy found this other guy who made videos using all the photographs NASA dumped and made a stop using single frame animation, made like a video of you can see the northern lights, you can see thunderstorms, you can see satellites. It's incredible. I love what people do with technology today. So, yeah, the Artemis mission was fantastic. Every day it was a new marvel. Those photographs they were sending back were just incredible. And to see, once again, humanity move out into the stars and that kind of an endeavor. And it was an American endeavor on our 250th birthday year. While everything else is going to hell in a handbasket, it was an amazing feat. And it was an amazing thing to watch happen and to see NASA pull that off without a hitch. Some things are still worth doing. And like I talked about, a continuum. We need space research because all the research that they do to make those missions possible trickles down into almost every level of technology, whether it's high technology, whether it's medical technology. Nothing is wasted in terms of gaining knowledge to travel through the vastness of space. I'm a big proponent, and I loved seeing it go down. It was fantastic. So like you, Victor, it was great. And let's see. You know what? I'm going to save this letter. It's a Star Trek letter. I'm going to save it because it's a long one. PWB. This comes from Patrick, PWB 1280. Hi, Rob. Would you be able to give me any pro tips on experiencing the Star Trek Las Vegas convention? This is a mecca I've been dreaming of visiting for decades, and finally, for the 60th anniversary, decided to make it so. I'll be in town for the whole show and staying at the Rio. I've been to many a convention before, and the standard stars on stage bits are fine, but what makes this convention uniquely Vegas? Give me a sample of the Burnett itinerary when in town, inside and outside of the convention. Thanks, Patrick. Well, first of all, I don't want to burst your bubble, but Las Vegas has become, over the last 10 years, not nearly as much fun as it used to be for one simple reason. Most of Las Vegas is now owned by two corporations, the MGM Corporation and Caesars. And now they treat everything like it's hotel pricing. A single beer costs $13, which is ridiculous. They've completely flipped the script on Vegas, and they're bilking everybody out of money 9 ways till Sunday. And it used to be when I was enamored of Vegas, I was in college and just got out of college, and I was beginning my adult life in Los Angeles in the late 80s, early 90s. And, we might be hammered out at night, and at 2 in the morning, someone would say, let's go to Vegas. And in 3 or 4 hours, we would be in Vegas. And you'd have fun, and you could literally have a great weekend in Vegas with very little money. Now, with the amount that things cost, it's very difficult to have the same kind of fun you have in Vegas. Like, you can't even, like, we used to be able to gamble at $5 tables. I mean, you can still go downtown if you want. But, now it's very hard. Most of the casinos, they only have $25 tables. And the problem is, if you're spending that much money gambling, you can't just have fun and not worry about it. You also can't take time to learn to gamble. But I don't want to, since you're going to Vegas, I still love Vegas. But you really should. I mean, it depends what you want to do. There's a lot of great YouTube channels and Instagram channels that tell you where you should go, and there's a lot of great restaurants. There's still a lot of great food deals to be had. There's a lot of great food in Vegas. And I don't mean necessarily going to Guy Fieri's, those things are fine, but there's a lot of boutique-y food places that are really fun to hit, weird breakfast places, and do your research if that's what you want to do. Now, there are attractions that I do think are great to hit, like the Sphere. I saw something interesting just the other day online that you can now go to a paramilitary place and fire a side gun out of a helicopter. I'm like, I want to go do that. You can go to shooting ranges, which are always fun. I've done that in Vegas. I've never been, in terms of like if you want to go to strip clubs and things like that. High-end strip clubs are never very fun. We used to go to really low, I wouldn't say low class, but I don't think the kind of strip clubs we went to in the 90s are even still there. They were like in mini malls, and they were full of single moms from the Midwest that would bring you up on stage, and the whole place was a party. And it was a lot of fun. Those were very different days because it wasn't corporatized the way it is now. I mean, it's hard to have fun when you're pinching pennies over a $13 beer. And imagine what cocktails cost. Suddenly you've had 3 or 4 drinks and you're $75 down. They still bring you drinks when you gamble, but again, if you can only play $25 hands, again, your money leaves quickly. And to me, that's antithetical to what they want to happen in Vegas. And I understand there's no more loss leaders. They used to use food and drink as a way to get you there and keep you there so you would gamble. I heard a statistic that said it used to be that they would get, it would be like 60-40. The gambling would be 60 and the 40 would be the tourism and everything else. It's completely reversed now. And I understand that, like everything else, it's got corporatized and expensive. But, again, there's a lot of stuff. You got to just do the research. The Rio is a lot of fun. Here's what I would say about the convention. It's great to see everybody talk, and it's great to interact with people and to go, they're sitting down signing pictures and things. But it's really fun to just interact with the fans. Mark Altman and Darren Doctorman and Ashley Edward Miller, the Inglorious Trexperts, have been running their own discussions that are all really, really good as well, really interesting. I might have been on 1 or 2 of them, but they're great. They're great. They are much more personable. But seeing the stars, it never gets old, and listening to stories, even though you might have heard them before. So that's always good. Sitting in the main room is fun. The dealer's room is fun. But really, it's the people. You wind up going to get dinner with somebody, or you sit at the bar, and that's always fun. And then you end up in some 8-hour conversation with people about various warp power. Is it better to have a artificial singularity, or is it better to have warp drive? Very interesting. But yeah. But, Vegas is what you make it. So do the research, see where you want to go. I mean, there's places like, look, if you want to go to the Sphere and see the Wizard of Oz, the Sphere is an incredible place, and I would suggest doing it. It's expensive, but going to see anything there is expensive. And find out what, you might want to see some shows. There's always good concerts in town. Check out who's there. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps, but you might see me there. And if you do see me there, bring me a double Jameson and say hi. But thanks for writing in. I very much appreciate it. Let's see. Here's another one. This one comes to us from Robert Romeo. Robert Romeo wrote a letter in previously. Dear Mr. Burnett, thank you for reading my previous letter regarding the specter of Martians in Total Recall. It was a real bonus that you pronounced my surname the way my family has always chosen to, like the Shakespearean character. Some say it differently, and many, for reasons unknown, add an extra R, turning it into Romero. A favorite director of mine, so I could do that too. So it was almost a thermodynamic miracle that you nailed it. Wherefore art thou Romeo? If I might address your audience directly for a moment, please be aware that although I won't spoil any major plot points, surprises, or revelations from Project Hail Mary, I will discuss a few minor moments of little interest to anyone but myself. Also, I will briefly speak in very obtuse language about a pivotal moment of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Dr. Manhattan goes to the movies. I want to see a well-laid Ted Turner newscast. Hey, it's all going to work out. Here's sports. That's what Bill Hicks said. By the way, shout out to Ted Turner. Turner Classic Movies was because of him. He passed away. It seems neither you, Dieter Bastian, nor I enjoyed Project Hail Mary as much as we'd hoped to, and all for the same reason. It lacked gravitas. It pushed most of its pile of chips into entertaining us, leaving few for challenging us or earning our respect. There are many people who would agree with us, but also an enormous contingent that couldn't care less. Some people see in color and some in black and white. Some people enjoy cilantro and some swear it tastes like soap. Mr. Burnett, you occasionally express a belief I agree with. I think you basically phrase it as art can be objectively good or bad. Lacking your conviction, I would probably say art is subject to principles that, if violated unintentionally, can diminish it. I do think art can be objectively good or bad. People's opinions of art are subjective. But the spirit is the same, and yet I can't square that belief with the nagging feeling that there's little utility in trying to convince someone the world is objectively in color, or that cilantro objectively tastes like soap. I'm haunted by a paradoxical idea that arguments for objectivity only apply to one of two camps. Just as fingers on a chalkboard are only going to bother the people in the room who can hear, and who might then debate the exact quantity of unpleasantness experienced, the issue really is ultimately framed by subjective perception. I have someone in my life who has great difficulty perceiving the passage of time. If they aren't actively staring at a clock while engaged in an activity, they truly don't know if 15 or 45 minutes have passed. I'm pretty sure most, if not all of us, experience this state at times when engaged in very specific activities, such as writing this letter. But this individual seems to live there. I suspect when watching a movie, many lucky individuals travel to that state. They're so fully engaged that if a moment is funny, they laugh. If a moment is sad, they cry. When the movie is over, they can actively think back through the experience and quantify laughs and tears. But their tallies would be very different from ours because they were experiencing each in isolation, unfettered both from what came before and any expectation of what might occur after. And it is now to them that I speak, so that any might choose to can better understand the rest of us. For the uninitiated, Dr. Manhattan is a character from Alan Moore's epic graphic novel Watchmen. Among his powers, he can see through time. From his point of view, the past, present, and future are happening simultaneously. As I get older, I feel more and more like Dr. Manhattan when I engage with stories, be they books, movies, TV shows, narrative-heavy video games, etc. In essence, I've lost the ability I had as a child to simply be absorbed by a story. Now, whether I'm loving or hating a tale, my mind is a beehive of activity, not only comparing the narrative against itself, but predicting what will come, and even cross-referencing against other works of the genre. Basically, Dr. Manhattan, if he could also now look through the multiverse, to any internet pendants he probably can now, I don't know, but that's not my point, and you know it. It sounds conceited choosing a demigod to represent my team, but I assure you it's more than a curse than a blessing. For you see, as time goes on, Dr. Manhattan loses his connection to humanity, and I often fear I might be gradually losing my lifelong love of storytelling and pop culture. By way of example, what follows are my thoughts going through my mind while trying to enjoy Project Hail Mary. To be clear, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just providing a play-by-play for those who experience something different. This is funny. If you know Watchmen, this is funny. It's Thursday night. I'm in a movie theater. Untrained, ersatz astronaut Ryland Grace just began his first spacewalk by slamming into the hull of his ship. My theater erupts in laughter, and I realize I will have to reluctantly tell this movie, I like you as a friend. Movies teach us how to watch them, and this movie just taught me our hero is invulnerable. Mistakes don't matter, space is wacky, and this tale will offer a paucity of dramatic tension, the fuel of storytelling. An hour from now, I'll be thinking back to this collision. It's an hour later. The film's climactic action set piece involves another spacewalk. I'm realizing that earlier moment established a precedent that is now undermining the drama at the very apotheosis of this movie. I'm trying to stay engaged. The colors are so beautiful and bright. They seem to be taking the audience to places. But not me. I'm traveling back to an hour ago. It's an hour in my past, and Ryland Grace has just experienced a collision that appeared bone-shattering. Storytelling is about making choices. They chose comedy. That's fair. But doesn't such reductionism ignore the counterfactual that they could have alloyed comedy and drama to forge a scene stronger than either element alone? After all, it's now 5 seconds before the collision, and Ryland Grace is inside the Hail Mary, bouncing off its bulkheads as he deals with zero gravity for the first time. And it's great. How zany. What a lovable fish out of water that Ryland Grace is. He's just like us. But now it's 5 seconds later and he's going on a spacewalk. Failing to properly clip one carabiner could result in him asphyxiating in his spacesuit as he drifts through a black void for all eternity. Even untrained, he must realize it's time to put on his big boy spacesuit. The humor from 5 seconds ago would have counterpointed the danger of this moment, and the slow, methodical tone of a dangerous spacewalk would have cleansed the palate for the humor of the message in a bottle scenes I will witness a minute in my future. It's 2 weeks later. I'm sitting at my computer writing this letter. 2 weeks in my past, Ryland Grace collides with the hull. I type those words. It's 5 days later. I send you this email. It's 1 week after that. You're reading this sentence on Robservations. It's almost a month ago. Ryland Grace collides with the hull. It's 2 hours later. The theater empties out. And I'm gone. To anyone thinking, I'll bet this joyless asshole didn't have any issues with Dave Bowman pinballing around Discovery 1's airlock, sans helmet no less, without a bruise on his face or a limp in his gait, I would point out, I'm not joyless. Also, not only is Dave executing very specific actions to mitigate the damage, but I interpret the design of the airlock as being padded, quite possibly for safety in emergency situations just like this. But those explanations are really just the tip of the verisimilitude iceberg. The real reason I never even thought about it until now is that I give 2001: A Space Odyssey a mountain of credit because the scene in question is the dramatic climax of the film, as there's no conflict after this showdown, and every moment before it has been spent establishing realism, including just how deadly space is. So if he appears no worse for wear, by that point I'm willing to take the film at its word. And now I say to you, hypothetical straw man I just created, We're the same, you and I, playing a game that a massive portion of the movie-going audience has no interest in and possibly doesn't even realize. And I say to you, Mr. Burnett, now that I've tacitly put words in both your mouth and, may God forgive me, that of the great Dieter Bastian, I yield the floor that I might hear your thoughts as well as that of your audience, regardless of their perception. For I'm well aware, despite the care I put into this letter, my silly musings are hardly the end. For, as Dr. Manhattan warned, nothing ever ends. Sincerely, Robert Romeo, Inner Demon Entertainment. P.S. Since I dragged Kinomeister Dieter Bastian into this mess, I might as well use this opportunity to suggest a couple cat-in-the-bag picks. I'm not saying either is a must-see, and I'm afraid they're both faux documentaries, but I recommend the horror films Strange Harvest and Savage Land. I own Strange Harvest. I have not seen Savage Land. That's good. Well, Robert, this was a fantastic letter. I love this letter. I think you really kind of nailed, for me, the thing about Project Hail Mary, as I went into it, as you pointed out, I really thought that, and I understand Lord Miller went for the comedy aspects of it. I think that The Martian was a lot better balanced between comedy, ingenuity, peril, and all of that. It was a much frothier mix. It worked with the continuum better. There were scenes, I think that it was a mistake not going back to Strat on Earth to increase the peril, at least having one more scene when Rylan was in space and you find out that they have to set off nukes in the Arctic to sort of bring about a nuclear winter so the Earth heats up a little bit. It keeps us, from freezing. So we, or greenhouse gases, what we want is more of a Venus than the Earth because the Earth is freezing. I think it needed that. I also like the idea that in the book there was the scene where Strat is brought up on charges because of her methods. I think that would have helped. I think that once the movie gets rolling along, the Project Hail Mary film, unlike the book, you never believe anything bad is going to befall Grace and Rocky. And like you said, the spacewalks, there wasn't the kind of tension there should have been. I didn't think so. And the thing about Rocky was Rocky, because of the way he spoke all the time, which was fine, but you couldn't take him seriously. You never saw him being enough of a scientist. He was Grace's equal in every respect, but because of the way he looked, there's no way around that. But I was hoping that they would transcend the cuteness of it all. And they really didn't. No, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed Project Hail Mary, but I thought it was going to win Best Picture after what we saw. What was interesting, the 8 minutes they showed at CinemaCon last year, I thought struck the perfect tone of awe and wonder and humor and all of those things. And I think, it leaned far too heavily into the humor, and I completely agree with where you're going. Now, to address the bigger issue. I've been thinking about this a lot because I've spent so much of my life consuming stories. And like when I'm watching, a mystery, or when I was directing True Noir, which is a well-trodden ground. How do you make it fresh? How do you make it unique? How do you make it interesting? And look, we've seen it all. We've heard it all. We already know what's going to happen. However, there are constantly new innovations. One of the things about Alvaro, his book Equimedian was surprising. It was not a story that I initially could pigeonhole. And that's what made it a joy to read. That is delicious prose. And I think that there are still stories that surprise, and I still feel awe and wonder. When I see Denis Villeneuve's Dune, when we saw the first 8 minutes of Dune 3 at CinemaCon, it was awe-inspiring. And I even know what's coming. It's going to be interesting to see how Children of Dune and Dune Messiah have been combined, I think. And I think that's the way to have done it. But I still get taken away and transported away. But I do think that we have people there is not the skill set that there used to be when we were younger people. And I think a lot of it has to do, I really do think a lot of it has to do with far less people read. And storytelling, while it's passed along through an oral tradition, the act of reading, and people are, what about listening to books? Different thing. When you're reading, you're engaging your mind in a much different way. Listening is a passive activity. When you're reading, you're using your eyes, you're using your hands to turn the pages or a cursor. Your brain is being activated in ways that aren't done any other way other than reading. And I think one of the problems with our storytellers today is they've only consumed TV and movies. They haven't even listened to Pink Floyd's The Wall enough. Not the movie, but the record itself. Because all that album-oriented rock, aside from, Pink Floyd's instrumentals, but when you think about the rock albums that I grew up with, a lot of those were storytelling as well. Styx's Paradise Theater and The Grand Illusion, which I loved, they were telling stories, even though you're just listening to those. But I don't think people are as adept at experiencing stories, breaking down stories, simply because people aren't doing it as much. And they're only getting one kind of story. Like I talked about, every horror fan worth their salt, when I was 13 or 14, could talk about the devils, at least in my circle of friends. Not because we were the smartest people in the world, just because it was a movie if people liked horror talked about seeing. Just like I really wanted to see Solo. Nobody would let me see it. I had friends that had a bootleg videotape of it, and even they wouldn't let me see it. But then when it played at the Neptune Theater, I took me and all my friends, and I'm like, we're going to see this forbidden movie. You ask people what Solo is right now, they probably couldn't tell you. They'll tell you what a Serbian film is, though. But, it's just a different world. And I think people, unfortunately, we, the consumers of stories, I say this all the time, we're people that look outward. Yes, we like to read. Yes, we like to watch movies. But we are looking outward for meaning. We are looking at other people, whether they're fictional or we're watching documentaries. Most of the people today want to see themselves reflected back at themselves. Everybody's navel-gazing. Nobody is looking outward for meaning. Some people are still, but society as a whole, we want to see our beliefs. We want to see ourselves reflected back in us in other people. And I think that's the real problem. And that's why I heard it put so well. The people that are writing The Simpsons now are the people that grew up watching The Simpsons. And nothing explains the failure of modern IP and modern entertainment more than that notion. However, we're still getting a lot of great stuff. So, there is always hope. There's the continuum again. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to end this, my first Robservations in a while. You're going to see a lot of me in the month of May. My birthday is actually the 15th. I'll probably be going to see a double feature. I got to see Obsession. Can't wait to see that. It looks great. And yeah, I want to thank everybody for being here. Let me check and make sure that there are some super chats that I have missed. Let's see. Titus Pulo is Rob's spirit animal. I will take your Darth. You are the channel philosopher, so I will take that. At face value. Larry Kordowitz, who's been a member for 7 months, says another great HBO series that was short-lived was Carnival. Ron Moore. I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. I really like Carnival. It was a little slow, but I really liked it. It was dripping in atmosphere. Major Chai Chai says, if we're ever in Vegas at the same time, I'll take you to the Nellis Officers Club. That is quite an experience. That would be Nellis Air Force Base. I'm in. Count me in. Can we go see UAPs? I'm just kidding. Is it Jay Thisky? Or is it JT? Jay Thisky? I have a weird question. There are no weird questions. So when Devil Wears Prada 2 was being filmed in New York, they were actually using city parts with fans in the background watching them film. How do they edit all that background noise out during final editing? Well, I'll tell you. If there's a lot of fans, they ask people to be quiet, but when you're shooting on the city streets in New York, all of that sound is probably unusable. but they'll record production audio, so he'll hear people talking, they're acting, and they use ADR. They use automatic dialogue replacement. They go in and they have, although there's a lot of great microphones now, but, they ask people, okay, quiet on the set. People are mostly quiet during takes, but there's still so much noise happening in New York City that what you do is you just add the sound in later. And that, that's typical. They've been doing that for a long time in Hollywood. As a matter of fact, if you watch a lot of Italian movies from like the 60s and 70s, they shot those MIT or MOT, MIT. Jesus, MOS. If you shoot something MOS, it's mid-out sound. So if you're shooting something MOS, there's no sound being recorded. And a lot of the time, you record sound because it's always a guide track. I would record sound on everything. But a lot of the time, they wouldn't have any sound on set when they would film movies in Europe, and that's why, because they were going to be dubbed in Italian and French and English and things like that. So that's why a lot of the time you see lip flap and it's very loosey-goosey. It doesn't match at all. So that's why you get a lot of that. But yeah, you just replace the sound later. So if someone's screaming or whatever, the sirens are going off, there's nothing you can do when you're on the streets of New York. So they'll record it. They'll record the production audio as a guide track, but then they'll come in. You have the actors. They do ADR, automatic dialogue replacement. They say their lines again and re-record, and then they add the atmosphere back over in post-sound. So, good question, though. So, again, I'm going to end the show. I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips and memberships. We had a great membership call last week. I'll probably have one next week, which is not this coming Saturday, but the week after, which is my actual birthday. I guess it'll be the 16th then. So we'll do another member call then. And there you go. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, have a better night, and thanks for being here. And I appreciate the moderating staff, Tom Jr. Jackson. Oh, and I want to say there was a little bit of a scare. The great Mikey Lito, who's been part of this channel for 5 years, I was told he had passed away. I was very despondent. And I finally found his phone number, and I figured I could call next of kin to find out what happened. And guess who answered the phone? Mikey Lito answered the phone. Reports of his demise were incorrect, and it was great. It's as Kirk tried to say to Commodore Decker and the Doomsday Machine, we're stronger with you than without you. And so Mikey Lito, or Michael Murphy, if you want to call him that, it's better to have you than it is to lose you. So it's great to talk with you this week. Thank you very much. And remember, Doomsday is going to be a good movie. You heard it here. I'm telling you. Uh-oh. Michael Elliott says, "Hey, Rob, how you been, buddy? Congratulations on acquiring those iconic movie posters. My birthday is today." Well, Michael Elliott, I'll pop back on and wish you a very happy birthday. Yeah, you'll be able to see stuff from the collection starting Friday, when you'll find out all about that. Anyway, I'm really going to say I've ended this show how many times? It's like the end of Lord of the Rings. I will see you all later.